More on the investigation. I want to bring in now CNN law enforcement analyst Matthew Horace and former Homeland Security Specialist Paul Schmick. All right, Paul and Matthew, good to see you. Paul, you first. Your initial reactions to the video?
Yeah, I think to understand it, we have to go back to November 1st, 2013, when a gunman walked in to LAX Terminal 3, opened fire, proceeded through the checkpoint, went and got into the sterile area of the airport, which was not a good situation because there's so much access at that point. Law enforcement took some time to get on the scene. What we can see from the video is the baggage claim area is typically a very safe area. People come and go. People in that area are typically happy. They just got off a safe flight. Family and friends are there to welcome them. There are also shuttle buses and things in that nature in the area. So it's just difficult because after that 2013 incident, law enforcement from the TSA and public reports was really putting pressure on law enforcement to put their resources at the checkpoint. And I think it's a perfect example where a vulnerability was identified, but the police can't be everywhere.
And then, Matthew, how do you evaluate the imagery that we've seen?
Well, you know, for us in law enforcement, we deal with the reality of the condition. It's cold and calculating and callous, and he shows a disregard and a sort of like a dehumanizing effect. It's almost like he's firing at the range, just firing at targets. There's no regard for humanity. Clearly, mental health, but nonetheless, cold and calculating.
But it's confusing, too, because we don't get to see what precedes the imagery that we saw, but just those first couple of frames just blending in, essentially, you know, Matthew, just seemingly to be just like everybody else, and then pulling out a weapon and firing, you know, away from the turnstiles that we can see, presumably toward, you know, the exit area of the airport, of this terminal. So as you see this, and we know now the facts that law enforcement have given us on the ground, that he picked up his luggage there at the baggage claim, went into the restroom, pulled out his weapon, ammunition, and then casually came out. How do investigators use those few frames to try to piece together motivation, why he felt provoked to do something like this?
Well, the motivation is going to come based on our investigative work that goes backwards into his social media, speaking with his family members and friends, going to everywhere he's ever lived or been during the last year or so. They're going to develop motivation. But let me tell you, this points out a vulnerability in our system, and I'm hoping that legislators and lawmakers can go back to the table again after a tragedy and decide what we can do to alleviate acts like this in the future, Fred.
And then, Paul, what do you see in terms of these vulnerabilities that may be magnified as a result of this?
Yeah, so the TSA has 20 layers of aviation security. It's everything from canines to behavior detection, hardened cockpit doors. But there's two layers specifically that come to mind when I review that CCTV or surveillance footage. He was on a death march, really. And what we have to look at, there are two layers that come to mind when I think about this. So there's the intelligence layer. What did we know before he came to the airport? And also the no-fly list, which is much more in-depth, where you would prevent him from flying. So, you know, intelligence has a ceiling on what they can do in terms of stopping individuals like that from flying. And I'm sure as the days roll out, we'll hear more about what was known before he embarked on an airport.
Earlier, I spoke with the Broward County Sheriff, and this is how he sees, you know, precautions to be made, vulnerabilities, particularly in baggage claim areas.
The answer isn't to beef up airports, although that might be important, and beef up venues. We're a free society. We as Americans, we go to airports and stadiums and venues, you know, every day of our lives. The answer is to have our lawmakers start to look at whether or not what they can do to ensure that convicted felons, people that are put on no-fly lists, certainly people that are suffering from mental health issues. And I have compassion for people that, you know, they're not problem people, they're people with very real problems. But why individuals are suffering from mental health issues, convicted felons, and certainly people put on no-fly lists, they should not, in my mind, possess handguns.
Matthew, do you see some changes or modifications in the immediacy before any kind of long-term goals can be met?
I would absolutely hope so. And Fred, as you know, it takes tragedy oftentimes to promulgate change. So hopefully we'll see some real hardcore change here. Something's got to happen. It's the same narrative over and over.
Matthew Horace, Paul Schmidt. Thanks so much, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Have a great day,
Thank you.
Frederica.
Thank you.